Welcome to Penang Institute's strategic podcast series called The Road Ahead, where we discuss contemporary ideas that shape our shared future. Some call it a VUCA world, some call it the far right wave, some call it the grand consummation of business and politics. However you want to define it, we live in very dangerous and volatile times, one that might drastically reshape the world we live in years to come. In the midst of all this, we also see a resurgence of a decolonization fervor, a desire to take back what is ours, our values, our heritage, and our future. My name is Fazil Som, and today we speak to Elina Noor, Senior Fellow of the Asia Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace based in Washington. Hi, Elina.
Hi, Fazil. Thanks for having me.
As always. Maybe, let's just go straight to it. Maybe for the benefit of the listeners, tell us how did you end up in the US? You know, I know we've crossed paths twice in our lives in primary school and in ISIS Malaysia, but boy, have we gone into separate directions. So yeah, tell us a bit.
Wow, I've completely forgot about our primary school encounter. Thank you for reminding me. It was ages ago, but
Yeah,
we won't get into that.
yeah. No.
So this is actually my third time living in the US, and over the course of, and now I'm really going to date myself. Over the course of about
Okay.
20 years, I've lived at various times in different parts of the US, but primarily in Washington, D.C.
Mm.
I am now based in California, but the
Oh.
third and most recent time that I found myself back in the US was in 2018. And so I
Ah.
decided that I wanted a break from the policy scene and the political scene in Malaysia. And I was offered a job in Hawaii
Mm.
with the US Department of Defense. There's a regional center out there in Hawaii that I joined for a number of years. And then I decided my spirit world is really the think tank world. So I moved back to Washington, D.C. and joined a think tank there.
Mhm.
Um, and for personal reasons, I moved out to California about slightly over a year ago. But I still continue to work in the think tank field, just trying to put my thoughts out there on policy issues.
Okay. How does the Palisades fire? How's it going? The management of it.
Oh, I don't make enough money to live in the Palisades. But when the fire started getting to Hollywood Hills, which is another area I can't afford to live in, it was only about 45 minutes to an hour away from
Ooh.
where I am. And so that was a little dicey for a while
Mm.
because of the uncertainty and the strength of the winds. But
Yeah.
so far, we've been well and blessed, Alhamdulillah. So hopefully we stay this way, just safe from the fires.
Yes. Fingers crossed. So, tell me a bit more about Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. What's the work you do there? What work do you do there?
Carnegie is a little distinct from all the other Washington, D.C. think tanks, I feel, because it is a think tank with a global reach. So Carnegie
Mm.
has offices in West Asia or the Middle East, depending on where you're sitting, in Europe, as well as in China. So we have presence in many different parts of the world. And where we don't, for example, on the continent of Africa, we do have an Africa program that resides in the DC headquarters. We
Okay.
also have scholars who work on Latin America, but we probably need more of a presence as well as more expertise in those regions, Africa and Latin America. And then I, of course, work on Southeast Asian issues at
Mm.
Carnegie, mainly on the intersection of tech policy, tech governance, as well as Southeast Asia writ large. But I
Mm.
think I try to occupy a niche space in that, as you know, in Southeast Asia, a lot of the focus on anything tech or digitalization is primarily through an economic lens.
Yeah.
And I try to take a slightly different perspective on tech issues and look at the contextual grounds for tech in the region. So I look, for example, at the historical arc of technology in Southeast Asia, what that means for the present agency that we keep talking about in the region, and
Mm,
what it means for our future in a way that we can shape and can truly be proud of.
right, right. I guess you're talking about the whole uh, tech architecture, the whole AI ecosystem architecture. I think that's probably what you are alluding to, right? In a sense of,
Well,
yeah, please.
no, I was just going to say that if you look at the architecture and infrastructure of tech, for example, submarine cables, modern day submarine communication cables have been laid on historically colonial cables. And so a lot of what we think as modern and new in terms of tech actually has old origins, and we often
Right.
forget this. So we can't be talking about the present and the future without knowing our past.
True, true. And these origins are, yeah, I mean, if you ask me, it would be very fragile origins. I mean, we're talking about these subsea cables. I mean, it is as old as um, a couple of 100 years, right? And it's so susceptible to changes, to all this anchoring of ships and all this. So it must be a very it's definitely a topic to discuss and to venture into, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into it now or later, but I'll
Yeah.
just say that even though we have modern day fiber optic subsea communication cables now in and around Southeast Asia, as you correctly pointed out, these communication lines, back then they were telegraph lines, were laid in the late 19th century.
Mhm.
And a lot of
Yeah.
it was built on the natural resources of our country, Malaysia, but also of Singapore, of Indonesia.
Mm.
And, we can talk a little bit more about that, but the stripping of natural resources to essentially support the colonial imperial enterprise all around the world was really anchored in our region. And how many of us really know about this?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole exploitation until today still happening on colonial lines. I mean, that's quite clear, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, let's go back to the US for now. We'll come back to
Yes.
the cables in a bit.
Yes.
So yeah, Trump's back. Trump's back into power. Taking over politics, right wing fervor. Oof, how do you survive? How do you survive up there? And I mean, seriously, what do you make of this, all these developments? Do you see like a more inward looking US, or do you see the continuation of an interventionist policy across the globe?
We had a preview of Trump's administration in his first term. And back then, I think there was a lot more surprise by the whole world because there was this appearance of the US being a certain way, and the expectation that the US would not swing so far to an extreme where there would be the election of an unpredictable, mercurial, erratic president who seemed to make policy on a whim every single day. But I think if you talk to minorities in the United States, and if you look at the history of the United States, and again, I think this is why history is really important, you'll see that the trajectory of the US and its political choices really represent a continuation rather than a disruption or a change from the norm.
Right.
Um, and I think the election of Trump in 2016 really pulled the mask off many people's eyes because essentially this is the United States. It's a very divided country, and there is an ugly side to it as much as there is this bright side that is often shown to the world and
Yeah.
that we have come to expect of the United States. And I think those who have always lived the United States face this shadow of the United States have always been aware of that. And maybe us from the
Mm.
outside, we've always been marketed this vision and image of a United States that did not seem to accord with the reality. And the re-election of Trump on completely solid grounds, he won with a resounding majority
Yeah.
for,
Yeah.
I think, only emphasizes this reality. So to
Mhm.
me, it's not so much of a shock anymore because we had that initial disruption, shock, surprise in 2016. And if we were expecting something different, then maybe we were living in La La Land.
Yeah. But would you say that Trump was actually riding on the current sentiment of Middle America, in which they find the loss of jobs, they find the loss of economic and livelihood, and he speaks to that. I mean, whether or not he represents that is a different story, which of course things will pan out in the next few months. But it does seem that he wrote on that sentiments, and of course, the Biden administration was not doing any better on the foreign policy front at home. So perhaps he was just riding on, the advantageous situation at the moment. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. He spoke to the right crowd, a crowd that was essentially getting fed up with being taken for granted
Yeah.
by the Democrats. If you're a certain color, or if you're a certain demographic, you were expected to vote Democrat, for example. And if you look at the votes that Trump managed to pull in this time around, he managed to get more Black male voters. There were
Mm,
more Latin Hispanics that voted for him, more women.
yeah.
And it shows that there
Just
was this groundswell of people who got frustrated with the status quo for different reasons. And they
mm,
all gravitated towards him, whether it was a protest vote because of the Biden administration's foreign policy, or whether it was a genuine appeal by Trump to the economic malaise of the United States, or a sense that the United States was being taken advantage of, was being exploited by other countries. That all played into Trump's hand, essentially.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And well, now that he has won, and now we see the real things happening. As you know, the tech billionaires are all over the place. One in particular is heading a government agency, and I don't know. The gut feeling here is we can see a lot of deregulation coming across the board in the US, especially when it comes to regulating the behavior of these multi-billion-dollar companies like Tesla, Amazon, Meta. So it smells of, it has this, it's going to be this profound impact on labor rights and environmental protection, for example. And of course, let's not forget the tax breaks. Do you think can you see this coming?
Yeah, I mean that's the other demographic we didn't mention, right? This is a new term I learned courtesy of my Carnegie colleague today, the of
Oligarchy. Okay.
oligarchy of tech moguls, right?
Awesome.
You could see it coming, honestly, if you followed some of his campaign supporters, Trump's
Oh yeah.
campaign supporters, you would see that there was a lot of interest by, for example, the guys who were all for cryptocurrency, for example. And the Silicon Valley elite was gravitating towards Trump precisely because of these promises, expectations of deregulation. There's
Yes, correct.
if you follow the tech scene in Silicon Valley in particular quite closely, there is almost a sub-demographic to this elite, this tech elite, that's very libertarian. And so there are these libertarian strands that don't like regulation of any sort on their personal life, on their public life, on their business life. And Trump has come into power at the right and opportune time as far as these tech elites are concerned.
Yeah.
And we're recording this on the day of Trump's speech at Davos, where
Yeah.
he explicitly said that his administration has begun the largest deregulation campaign in history.
Oh, wow.
And he very proudly said that.
Amazing. Yeah.
So you're absolutely right, right? We're going to expect a lot of deregulation across the board. He's
Mm.
already begun with dismantling the Biden administration's executive order on AI regulations or AI guidelines.
Oh,
So the concern is there'll be less safety guardrails around the development of AI
yeah.
and more of what these tech bros have been saying and pledging, more
Yeah.
self-regulation.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
yeah, and also the crypto community, right? I mean, we're talking
right.
about deregulation of the crypto ecosystem, and for good or bad.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And deregulation of the energy industry.
Mm.
Trump has promised to basically drill, baby, drill, because the United States apparently has the largest amount of oil and gas reserves of any country on earth in
That's it.
Trump's.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
yeah,
it goes
putting.
to, yeah.
Sorry, you were saying.
No, I was just saying it goes to your point about environmental concerns, labor concerns, all these
Yeah.
things are going to converge into one big mess.
Exactly, yeah. And of course, the whole fracking in the United States is of course is the number one, and oil and gas is here to stay, at least in that part of of the world. But also, the doubling down on the BEV competition with China, right? I mean, they through during the Biden administration, they had this deal with Angola, I think, right?
Mhm.
To develop the Lobito corridor, where they're still trying to extract a lot of all these essential ingredients for battery making from the Congo, from Africa. So, as you said, it's drill baby drill all the way.
Yeah.
Battery, oil.
Yes, but a lot of this deregulation is going to have severe ramifications down the line for us in Southeast Asia. For
Mm.
example, with the deregulation of tech, it so happened that Meta announced that it was going to get rid of fact checkers a few days before Trump's
Yeah,
inauguration. And
that's
we've seen before how the lack of fact checkers has resulted in actual physical violence, mass killing in our part of the world. And so, what happens in Washington or in Silicon Valley definitely has an impact on us. And this, the United States going back to oil and gas with fervor is going to result in greater climate emergencies for so many of us in different parts of the world.
mm, yeah, true. You're looking at how things are panning out in the US and China's capital flight into Asia because of all the policies of from the US. What do you make of Malaysia's stance in all this? Malaysia's foreign policy thus far. Do you feel that we are on the right track?
So Malaysia has kept a very steady and even keel in our foreign policy approach throughout the decades, regardless of whoever was in power. And that's one of the strengths of Malaysia's foreign policy approach, I feel. We may have compromised on some of our principles at times for practicality of for
Yeah.
convenience, and I'm thinking in particular of some small amount of trade that we've had with Israeli companies, for example.
Yeah.
But on the whole, we in Malaysia have been very clear about our stance that's rooted in international law and the fact that we're friends with almost every country on earth and an enemy to none.
Yeah. That has always been our policy, and I think the dividends are clear. We are both attracting a lot of interest, and still the relationship with US and China and the EU, in a couple of days, or yeah, there's going to be a huge delegation of EU ambassadors to Penang Institute as well. So yeah,
Mm.
we are seen as neutral, I would say, and we just have to tread that line carefully, I guess.
Right, but I wonder if that is enough. It's necessary, but is it sufficient within an
Mm,
increasingly complicated and complex world? Oh, what do I mean by this? Well, a lot of the economic investment commercial decisions that were made are now being tinged, securitized, some would say weaponized by national security imperatives imposed on us from the outside, um, primarily from the United States, but also in response by China. And so, this fragmentation of a global ecosystem, whether in the space of tech or in economics, that's all coming to be much, much starker now. And so, the lines that we had between what was purely commercial or economic versus what was purely political or security, those lines are being blurred. And so, I think on the one hand, while Malaysia needs to maintain its stance of, okay, we're going to stick to our principles of upholding international law, we also need to be a little smarter and more strategic and more proactive about shaping our future and our destiny in a much, much changed world. So we can't proceed along business as usual lines. It's a new normal,
yeah,
to use a hackneyed term from COVID, but
yeah,
I think we need greater proactive strategic diversification.
true. Okay, talking about destiny, you mentioned destiny just now. Uh, what do you think? How do you think PMX can steer the direction of ASEAN to take advantage of the current situation? What do you think? I mean, we are now holding the chairmanship of ASEAN in 2025. What can we do with all this?
So credit where credit is due. I think under PMX, the ASEAN chairmanship that Malaysia holds is starting to look in different, maybe more creative directions, right? For example, I talked about strategic diversification. And what that looks like in practice is, for example, what Malaysia has proposed, bringing together ASEAN, the GCC countries, and China in meetings at the ASEAN summit, for example, or on the
Mhm.
sidelines of the ASEAN summit. But I think there can be more that could be done in that space. We need to be engaging, for example, with the African continent. We need to be reviving, for lack of a better term, that South-South cooperation that kind of took off back in the day but never really did.
Yeah,
And maybe we need to rebrand it a little, but I think the first step has already been taken to look elsewhere beyond the traditional areas of Europe or North America.
right,
Um,
right.
we already have an MOU in place, ASEAN does, with the Pacific Islands Forum. We should be following up on that. That was done under the Indonesian chairmanship, and Malaysia should be taking up the mantle and really trying to flesh that out in more concrete terms.
Interesting. And of course, as you know, ASEAN is having issues of its own, and perhaps one of the things that PMX can do, obviously with his new drive of inclusivity and sustainability, to try and see how we can rein in the other ASEAN states, right? ASEAN member states into, coming strong together in the face of all these, you know, issues. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think internal cohesion and self-confidence is going to be the biggest challenge for Malaysia as the ASEAN chair this year. Obviously, Myanmar, intractable issue.
Yeah.
The generals have basically stuck their middle fingers up at ASEAN again. And
Yeah.
the South China Sea dispute remains unresolved. There's supposed to
Yeah.
be a code of conduct that
Yeah.
should be finalized very soon. Unsure if that's going to be done during Malaysia's chairmanship year. But you see, for example, the Philippines getting increasingly frustrated and
True.
exasperated by what they see as a lack of ASEAN support for their, they call it, I think, the transparency policy or initiative in the South China Sea. And so I think there's tendency by some countries to look elsewhere beyond ASEAN to solve their security dilemmas is not necessarily a healthy thing for ASEAN centrality and its relevance. And this will
Totally
be
understand.
some, yeah, this will be something that Malaysia will have to work very hard on during this chairmanship year.
Yeah, true. And all these are interlinked, isn't it? This whole South China Sea thing, because obviously a more, using a better word, belligerent China in the case of, claiming that territory is also because of the issue with the US, right? This whole rivalry and this whole needing to have breathing space in the backyard is what drives China to assert these claims, and of course to the detriment of ASEAN's integrity, or in some countries,
So I
right?
think the South China Sea territorial dispute and China's belligerence is its own problem, but it certainly has not been helped by the active interest of external parties to the dispute, like the United States and some of
Mm.
its partners.
Yeah,
Um, and within ASEAN as well, there are claimant states that have claims and disputes within the South China Sea. And so we need to resolve this internally within ASEAN itself.
right.
Um, and then maybe we need to figure out how to deal with China collectively. But the fact that we in ASEAN also have these claims amongst ourselves certainly isn't a good starting
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I will. As you said, let's hope PMX can solve these issues, or at least mitigate these issues during our championship in for ASEAN.
Yeah.
Um, I would like to also touch back, for what we discussed just now about tech, the AI and the tech ecosystem. As we know, the adoption of tech in all aspects of life, is happening at great speed, and it's a do or die moment for businesses to jump onto the AI bandwagon. And of course, this will inevitably shape our reality in no time. I mean, as we speak, a lot of things are shaping up. But let's talk about, as we said just now, about the architecture of the AI ecosystem being developed to favor certain cultures and values and not the other. How important do you think this notion is, and what is your take on that?
Yes, I think if we rewind a bit, is it a do or die moment though, Fazil? Because I think we get ourselves all twisted in this impression that we're in a race for something that
Right.
involves digitalization.
Right.
And this rat race is what's gotten us into this bind now,
Yeah.
where we're not really reflecting very deeply about what it is we're hoping to get out of, whether it's AI or other digital
Mm.
tech developments. But you're right, and this feeds into your question about reclaiming our identity, our values, our cultural heritage in the digital space. If we find ourselves caught up in this race without asking ourselves, well, what is it we're trying to not only represent digitally, but represent? We need to figure out what it is that we're presenting in the first place in order to represent that in the digital space. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Um,
Yeah, please.
Go ahead.
No, no, just you're right in the sense that there's this huge fervor in jumping on the bandwagon and going into more and more deep tech, deep AI applications and all this. I guess it's keeping up with the Jonases. I
Right.
guess we've been sold this idea that tech will save the world. Of course, to the benefit of all the tech bros.
Mhm.
But I guess just like the smartphone, right? A lot of we had a lot of friction with it. It's gonna destroy our lives, da da da. But it's there to stay. So the thing here is for me, I'm thinking of whether we like it or not, that wave is coming, and whether you're in it or you're not in it.
Yeah.
So
No,
so that's the
I
that's the dilemma, the conundrum that a lot of us face, right? Yes,
right.
I feel this whole thing about, we are moving way too fast. We are not, our hands are not on the earth, so to speak.
Mm-mm.
We're not hearing the pulse of Mother Nature, and whether what we're doing is actually detrimental to the whole, not only to Mother Earth but also to our own well-being as well, because we are moving too fast in all this aspect. Yeah, I mean that's where I come in, and I think what you're saying about this whole thing about uh, architecture being written to actually prolong or sustain this kind of thinking. Uh, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think if you talk to historians of technology, none of this is new. This mapping of what we think of as advanced and unprecedented. I gave the example of submarine communication cables. The fiber optic cables really have been laid on the lines of old telegraph cables that connected the imperial center to their colonial outposts.
Yeah.
And you look at the mapping technology, for example, right? Mapping technology is based on cartographic exercises of the colonial past as well. There cannot be digital mapping without there having been this precedence of actual physical mapping. In the same way, we think of AI as separate almost from data, and we think of data in very abstract terms. But I think it behooves us to think a little more carefully about data as relational. So, data about myself speaks a lot about my genealogy. It speaks a lot about my history, my relationships with friends, with family. All this, it speaks about my ethnicity in the context of Malaysia. How do you tell if a Malaysian is ethnically this, that, or the other, or a mixture of all those ethnicities? That's all based on census surveys. And when were census surveys actually done? During the colonial period. Why were they done? To manage, control a population. And
Mm,
so there's this colonial baggage that we usually don't think about when we think of tech, because we see just bright, shiny objects in our eyes. And I think we need to look back a little and understand where some of these technologies, how they were built on.
mm,
AI in the military, for example, you go to defense exhibitions, you're marketed, battle tested, battle proven AI technology. How
yeah.
were they battle tested? What does that mean? What is the metric of success and efficiency? Is it the kill rate? If it's not, if it's something more benign, well, how was that AI system trained if not by vacuuming huge amounts of data to present that picture of precision and efficiency?
Mm,
So I think we need to be reflecting and considering very deeply some of the origins and the provenance of these data developments, as well as the AI developments that we keep wanting and aspiring to.
right. Yeah, I think the AI front, I think this whole regulation of AI is so super critical. As you said, this will only grow, and without all the necessary parameters, necessary rules and regulations, it can be devastating for the world as you know it. Um, yeah, we just hope that uh, the, the 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 powers that be, the leaders that be, are aware of this, and we can hopefully have more discussions on such an important topic.
Yeah, I'm such a contrarian on this because there's so much tech optimism in Southeast Asia. It seems to me that we are deliberately blinding ourselves to some of the risks and harms that are already present and that are hurting populations. We think of how many workers will be dismissed from the workforce, for example, because of AI. But we don't really think in the same terms of how much labor is being exploited to train the AI systems to distinguish for us what is a bus from what is a bicycle.
Right.
All that requires manual sorting and menial labor. It's tedious, and these gig workers are often way underpaid. And sometimes they're subjected to really harmful, terribly traumatic images and videos so that the computer can decide for us what counts as bestiality, what counts as rape, what counts as murder. But there are actual human beings sitting behind those screens, sorting through those images and videos so
Mm,
that we have the luxury of this sanitized version of what we see on our screens.
mm. Wow. Okay, that's really deep.
But it's true, it's what's
Yeah,
happening.
it is. It is happening now. Yeah, you're right. We in Southeast Asia, at least, we are seeing the good side of it, right? But the main the workings behind is something we take for granted, and this is something we should talk about. Yeah, you're right. And yeah, I'm I'm still grappling about this whole the development, and oh well.
Sorry,
So
I can talk for like 3 hours about this, but I won't.
I know. And Nina, I mean, really, I know we can go on and on. There's all things to cover, but we have a limit to our conversation, and it's always great to have a conversation with you. As always, I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for taking the time, Elina.
Likewise, I always have fun talking to you, and thanks for indulging me.
Yes, and I hope to see you very soon in this region. Hasta muy pronto.
Sí, sí, hasta muy pronto, hermano.
Okay, you've been listening to The Road Ahead. That's all from me. Thank you.